Another commonly asked question is basically like, what are my thoughts on Wrath of the Lich King? But I do want to also wrap in an entire discussion about WoW Classic in general, because it used to be, and honestly kind of still is, a really important topic to me, something that I really was a big fan of, spending a lot of time on. If you don't know, from pretty much WoD until about mid-Legion, I played a lot of Classic private servers. And even back then, people were constantly asking me about Wrath of the Lich King. I think there's a lot of people out there who think like Wrath was kind of like the pinnacle of the beginning of the game. And as somebody who played from Classic through TBC into Wrath, I can say that I really don't agree with that. For me, Wrath was kind of the time when the game started to go in the wrong direction for a while. And honestly, a lot of the decisions in Wrath are things that we still are plagued by to this day. So the early game had a lot of problems, but a lot of people still have a lot of fond memories and nostalgia on it. So you might be surprised to hear me say so firmly that I have no interest whatsoever in Wrath of the Lich King. And I'm going to tell you some reasons why. But before I do, I also want to say that something very peculiar happened just recently. A blast from the past, a guy named Alex Sensual actually returned to YouTube. And I have to say, his time away has really helped him gain perspective. And I am very happy to hear that he is in such a better, mentally healthy place with World of Warcraft, with the community around him, and potentially with YouTube as well. And it really opened my eyes, and it's the reason why I'm making this video today, not a couple months from now. I was originally going to make this closer to whenever Wrath was coming out. But let's talk a little bit about the actual game itself right now, because that part's easy for me. I started really playing Wrath seriously. Like, that was the first expansion that I was super serious about. It's when I made my first guild, when I made a lot of the connections and friendships that are still a big part of my life today. Like, it's the experience that I should be the most nostalgic for, but I'm just not at all. And it's pretty easy to explain why. The content was just not very good, to be honest. Like, it has some of the worst raids ever by a mile. It has some of my least favorite zones. It has some of my least favorite content in general in the game ever. Zuldrak, easily my least favorite zone ever. The dungeons in that type of area and like kind of the undead troll thing, really just, I don't like that. I don't know why. Nax being a complete remake, just a worse version of the classic one. And then of course, Trial of the Crusader, that's easily the worst raid they've ever made. But I always think it's quite funny. Like, could you imagine with the amount of hate that people spit at this game for no reason whatsoever nowadays? Can you imagine if they said for the first raid of Dragonflight that they were just going to remake like Dragon Soul? That was going to be the first raid of Dragonflight. That's what happened in Wrath of the Lich King, dude. They remade a raid. It's only like 3 years after that raid was being rated and being progression for people. And not only did they do that, they did the first absolute mortal sin of this game. They removed content from that raid that is now no longer available. You would have heard me talk a lot about that with Cataclysm. It happens in Wrath as well, and it is an absolute travesty. Now, to be fair, just like with Cataclysm, I don't think the people who made those decisions knew just how important collecting stuff was going to ultimately end up being. So you can kind of see why they did it, but it's just really ridiculous. Like, when you actually go back to Classic and look at how much stuff was in Nax that's not in the Wrath version and onward, it's kind of sad, to be honest. Like, even just the gear itself, like, it's just really sad. But the main reason I would never play Wrath on like a new server of Wrath is because there's just no reason to. Like, everything that I might want to see in Wrath of the Lich King is still in World of Warcraft and Shadowlands. It comes down to a point where what's the actual purpose of playing it if you don't want to do any of the raids or any of the max level content, and you have no actual like revisitation of sites and storylines that don't exist anymore? I actually kind of really only wanted to check out Classic and some of TBC for that reason. It's like they removed so much good stuff from the game. It's actually kind of crazy. And now when they return it, it's like almost like they're showing just how dumb the old version of the development was. Like, that they'd be willing to just remove huge swaths of content. That's really the only reason I have any interest in old WoW. It's because I'd like to go back to things that just you can't see anymore. The only real thing that you can enjoy would be class design, and I don't really care. Like, there'd be one way that I would play Wrath of the Lich King. That's if they make Death Knights not a hero class. It sounds probably pretty stupid, but like, I actually quite like Death Knights in Wrath. I just don't like much of the content in Wrath. I absolutely, like I said, I absolutely refuse to do some of these zones ever again. So leveling a Death Knight and pretty much starting in Wrath is just like not very interesting to me at all. In fact, if you remember, one of the only times I actually enjoyed playing TBC was when I was actually playing the TBC classes in classic content. That's actually like fun. Like, I've been saying that for years. Like TBC classes are just kind of better than classic classes. So if you can just play the classic content with the TBC client, that would probably be like one of the best ways that I can enjoy WoW. So just add that Wrath thing in too as well. I don't really like a lot of the class design in Wrath. It gets a lot worse from TBC onwards, but Death Knights still are a shining example of some of the best creativity they've ever had with classes. And if I could play that in content that I actually enjoyed playing, oh my God, I could actually see myself playing it. But we'll see what actually happens with like the whole boost thing and everything. I don't know. On top of that, like just dungeons and tanking in general, two things that I'm usually really interested in and could have been interested in enough to play in TBC. They just are the worst that they've ever been. Wrath dungeons are so freaking easy. They have no real purpose in tanking, and kind of just like the meta of the way the classes interact with each other is just absolutely at its worst in classic. So that's all the easy stuff. Like that's I've already made videos on that. I actually have another video on Ace Games TV on all of this stuff. So if you want to hear my detailed opinions on any of those topics, you can check that video out instead. But there's more to it, and this is why I brought up Alex Central, because honestly, it's kind of nostalgic to see that dude again, to see him playing WoW, to see him leveling in the Barrens, and it really made me think about this topic. And he said something that I actually have to say changed my entire opinion on this topic. He's historically been like really kind of like somebody who tries to call out corporate corruption and things that like seem like really unfavorable to the person who might pay for these services. And to his credit, he realizes how much of a negative cycle that puts you in. You'll just be doing that for the rest of your life. And I think he's looking to move on with it. And I have to say I have a huge amount of respect for that. But that mentality still opened my eyes today, because I actually had not thought about this until he brought it up. I've been thinking about a lot about how like, what is the actual difference? Because obviously, like, if you're not aware, what I'm about to talk about now is the actual people who play this game and why I'm just absolutely incompatible with them. I cannot have any enjoyment alongside these people. They absolutely ruined Classic for me. Even people who I thought were my friends when we started playing Classic together, they completely changed their mentality. It's like a freaking virus, man. It's actually scary how weird the people who play Classic, like WoW Classic, TBC, and will play Wrath as well, seriously, it's so strange. It's like paranormal how different they play the game. And all I can think of is like, how did this get to this point, dude? Because when I played on Nostalrius, dude, there'd be 20,000 people online on a single server, and none of this happened. It was never like this. People were like actually willing to explore the game and try to suspend some of their, you know, at the time, like whatever it was, like 2016 knowledge to play Classic, to actually get into the game the way it was supposed to be done. And now you cannot even come close to finding that. Like, between the weird parse mentality on content that's like not even remotely challenging, the way people like try to like min-max absolutely nothing, the way people treat each other, this whole GDKP thing, the way gold and the economy in general has worked, it is a travesty, and I can have no respect for it. But he brought up something that I never even thought about, man. He's like, this is Blizzard's fault. This is them doing this. This is them allowing it. And he said private servers would have actually stopped that kind of thing. And he believes that they did stop that kind of thing. Now, this is a very interesting conversation, because like a lot of the private server stuff was like super drama based. There was a lot of like people stealing money, and it came really to a big head, especially with him. I don't want to get into that right now, but there was a lot of shady stuff going on some private servers. But I actually totally agree with what he said on this, dude, that the people who ran the servers actually cared about the authenticity of the game, and Blizzard just doesn't. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, man, because I think a lot of people actually don't care about it either, man. This whole J. Allen Brack nonsense is actually so freaking true. It's unbelievable. When he said you think you do, but you don't, he was not talking about the people who played on Nostalrius, dude. He was talking about the people who play World of Warcraft actively and are the now core audience of TBC and eventually Wrath. Those people literally don't care about this at all. And that's just this mentality of like modern life, like 2022. Like, you're used to everything getting easier and more tailored to your convenience, and that is just not what the game was about at one point. So you have to actively strive to make it about that in the modern day WoW now. And he said, like, when I said no changes back then, it wasn't necessarily because I wanted no changes, it was because I didn't want what TBC became. And my God, did that open my eyes on this, because he's entirely right, dude. dude. Like, this is an unrecognizable product, man. Let me tell you something. If you didn't see this, they are actually shutting down servers. The Burning Crusade Classic, whatever you want to call it, is shutting down servers. Servers that people would have played on for now, like what, like 3 years? They're actually shutting them down. This is so unbelievably unrecognizable. This has never happened. Never once has WoW ever done this. And you know why? Because they find better solutions. They're not forced into making dumb decisions because the community is so backwards playing this game. It's like none of those people actually care about the game being like no changes, like authentic, right? They don't care about that, because if they did, they wouldn't be running dungeons for leveling, and they wouldn't be boosting and all this nonsense with bots and everything. And this is all because Blizzard allows it. And this is why you have so many problems with the modern game too. It's actually very interesting because Blizzard is just scared to police its community. I don't necessarily know why. I think originally it was because they didn't have the resources to, or they didn't have the kind of mentality to dedicate set people to do it. And I've, famously defended their handling of bots in live WoW, especially because I think it is important that they are 100% sure it's a bot. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, you can just follow a bot around for 5 minutes and you'll know it's a bot. But dude, that's not a bot. Like, I could run around in circles and pick an herb every 5 minutes. That doesn't mean I'm a bot. You have to be 100% sure that you're banning that account for the right reasons, because that's money being lost. And that is the key difference between them and private servers. Private servers were shady as shit, dude. These people are stealing money from donations. But it's different because it's not coming from the game. They're not worried about actual profits from the people playing the game. So they're willing to draw lines in the sand and set rules about the gameplay. And then they just hope that the actual popularity of that product will be enough to get money from sources that they wouldn't normally have access to, right? Like, nobody actually had to pay to play on private servers. So they had to be more industrious with how they got their stolen money. And it's actually kind of crazy that ends up being a better product of these old versions of the game. But all in all, I just can't get behind this whole social wave that has swept over this game. It just has no interesting elements to me. It's basically like taken all the best parts of these early expansions and just kind of flipped it on its head, diluted it. And I think a lot of people who were serious about playing Classic really started to get sick of that too. Like, I genuinely don't think the same people who were fighting for Classic are now also excited about Wrath of the Lich King. But the real thing that kind of is the nail in the coffin for me is that they're talking about Cataclysm now. It's like, okay, the only thing I was interested in was kind of this preservation, kind of this museum of this game, going back to a time when you just couldn't. And if we're going to Cataclysm, I mean, that's just not even close to what was asked for, right? It's actually kind of ironic, to be honest, because so many people wanted Classic for so many reasons, and Cataclysm is the reason that those people couldn't get what they wanted in a different version of the game. So leave me out of it. I want nothing to do with it, man. They really messed this all up. I have to say, Blizzard just did a really bad job. There's like 3 major things that I could have easily just been consulted on and told them all the major problems that there was on private servers. They failed to account for any of them. This whole like weird population problem now is all a result of them mishandling servers and not taking the smart approaches to allowing people to play the game when and where they wanted. And it's all easily solvable if you just say, listen, this is what needs to happen for the game to be the healthiest. This is how we are approaching it. And if you don't like it, get lost. But they saw the dollar signs. So Classic still probably to this day remains a massive source of income for them. People are only sub to WoW for that. And things like, this whole boost thing, this is kind of how they make their money, right? Like, there's no purchase of TBC, there's no purchase of Wrath. So those millions of people who are playing it aren't going to purchase anything other than a sub. Yeah, it's not surprising to me, but that's why I won't be playing Wrath and won't have any interest in it. So thank you for watching. I hope this has helped. If you have any opinions on this topic, I'd love to continue the discussion. Otherwise, we will see you guys in the next video.